Good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many of you joining this webinar this morning. I can see the number of participants increasing, so I'm just going to let that happen over the next few seconds before we start. Okay, morning again, everybody. Just before we make a start, can I ask you to use the Q&A box if you've got any questions? And also it'd be really great to check that everybody can hear me okay. So please let me know in the box if you can hear me okay. And then I don't feel like I'm just talking to a blank screen. Somebody's raised their hand. Okay, that's excellent. So I can see a few people there who can say that they can hear me. That's excellent. So it's lovely to see you this morning for the virtual London Language Show. I'm actually just recovering from COVID. I've had it quite badly over the last 2 weeks. So this has been something which has been quite nice to focus on and think about. And if I'm not at my normal 100%, then please excuse me. So I know quite a lot of you might be listening to this also offline, so you might have just be looking at a recording. And I do hope that we can talk about some things that you'll find useful today. So my role is I'm a head teacher. I also still continue to teach languages. And a few years ago, I was an Ofsted inspector for a certain amount of time. So as an additional inspector, doing inspections around sort of 6 or 7 a year. But really, what I want to talk about in particular is the new framework for inspection. My current school we're expecting to be inspected any minute as soon as Ofsted restarts. Obviously, it's not ideal in the current pandemic, but we're still trying to get ready and prepare. So I want to talk you through some things that Ofsted will be looking for in particular for Key Stage 2. I want to talk you through some of their visits with the new framework that took place between September 2019 and March 2020 before they stopped. What were some of their particular findings around Key Stage 2 MFL? What can be some of the solutions to some of the negative things that they found in classrooms? So I'm hoping that this is going to be very practical and solution focused for you. So obviously the new 2019 framework is very much around looking at curriculum design. Has it been well sequenced? So is the way that languages are taught, and I'm just assuming we're looking at Key Stage 2 at the moment. If you do things in Key Stage 1, that's brilliant, that's a bonus. But something that will be well sequenced would be where, for example, you take verbs in a simple form, in the I form, in 1 year, perhaps in year 3, and then in year 4, you move it to the he, she form, which is called the third person. Perhaps in year 5, you move to the you and the we form. And then in year 6, you're doing it in all of the forms. So that will be a way that you'd sequence the teaching of verbs, for example. And verbs are the absolute key to success in languages. Do we help pupils to make connections? So are pupils thinking about something that they've learned previously and then linking it to their current learning? And really importantly, do they remember what they've learned? So we're going to be looking at all of those facets today. Because people don't learn their second language or their first sort of learnt language in the same way that they speak their native language, we have a formal instruction model, and therefore we have to define and choose what our content will be. We have to decide how we're going to move from word to sentence to text level. And then it's almost like a spiral scheme. We've got to keep reinforcing over and over again, because children do forget, human beings forget. That's the nature of learning. We forget, then we're reminded again, and it takes us less time to remember what we've been taught, and it comes back more quickly. So the building blocks of language learning for the purpose of curriculum design have been, through lots of sort of research and reports that have come out, have been sort of decided that they are phonics, grammar and vocabulary. Hopefully these are all 3 words that we can immediately latch onto and think, yes, I know what that means. So when we're designing a curriculum, we need to make sure that all three of those aspects move in a logical sequence and that students and children can make progress in each of those aspects. So we know there's been around 100 HMI visits to look at MFL in primary schools between September and March of last year. We know that inspectors will talk to the MFL leader in a school, discuss the content and sequencing. Then they'll want to do a deep dive look into what's actually going on in the classroom. And they'll talk to teachers teaching it, they'll look at books, do work scrutiny, and they'll also talk to the pupils. The sorts of questions that it's very likely they may not ask them in this order, or the words might not be the same, but this is essentially what you'd need to have to answer is, what does your design look like? What's the rationale behind your design of your curriculum? And I would say it's really important to mention those three pillars, the phonics, the grammar, and the vocabulary, that you should have some examples that can show progression. So if you had an actual sort of long-term map that really clearly showed that progression and then showed some student work, some children's work, that sort of backs up what you're saying, that would be a perfect way of providing evidence for that. You talk about how it's delivered. Ofsted make no judgment about what you should deliver, but I was fortunate to be part of a webinar where I was delivering alongside Michael Wardle, who is the Chief Ofsted Inspector for Primary Languages. And he would say that around 30 to 40 minutes a week as an actual slot would be ideal. But then he would also expect it to be drip fed perhaps 5 minutes during registration time or at different points during the week to help children remember. The progress aspect is really important. So it's important to be able that you could articulate how children are making progress, and that you also in some way diagnostically assess the children so that you can show that you're making impact. It doesn't have to be a formal assessment. You could assess along by a sort of tick sheet, as it were, and you would use the age-related expectations methodology. Where is it, emerging? Is it secure? Is it exceeding? That sort of thing. But you would be expected to show that that you are doing that. Now, these are some findings from individual schools from these 100 visits. I've put the words in green when it's something positive that was found, and I've highlighted words in red when it was negative, just to help so we can sort of quickly and easily see where were the strengths and where were the things that schools weren't doing so well. So where it's strong with relation to phonics, phonics is being taught in a systematic way. That means there's a clear sort of list of phonemes that are being focused on, that children are practicing it and probably going back and revisiting those phonemes, because you can't just teach it once. And where it's not good, it's where they don't learn phonics at all, or it's not taught systematically. And as a result of that, the impact will be that children's pronunciation is inconsistent, and perhaps even they are exposed to inaccurate pronunciation from the teacher. So that does show that that was a real focus of Ofsted, and it's so important that you are teaching phonics in a systematic way. We'll go on later on to look at how you can do that. In terms of grammar, children need to be building on their knowledge each year, and that's seen positively in these two examples, and that the nouns and verbs are becoming increasingly complex, for example, and they talk about a range of tenses. And I would say that you need to include the simple future tense, which is, I am going to play football tomorrow, and the past tense, at least by year 6, I went to town yesterday, that sort of thing. In terms of vocabulary, the positive aspects that were found that were children were learning the vocabulary in manageable chunks, and that they could recall it, and that they can remember many common words and phrases. Negative things that were found were children not having their own books or vocab records, and not routinely practicing vocab during the week. And even there was an example of vocab that doesn't fit well into the French curriculum, such as learning vocabulary for hunting tools and dwellings in ancient Britain, which obviously probably linked to what they were doing in history, but was not particularly useful for French. And we know that we've only got a limited amount of time. So it's really important, in a way, less is more. Teach less vocab, but make sure you revisit it and make sure it's really useful vocabulary. So is it the sort of vocabulary children could use to talk about likes and dislikes, to, transactional vocabulary where they could order something in a cafe? Can they describe simple things? It's important to not go off piece too much in terms of trying to make cross-curricular links if it doesn't fit well into a French style curriculum. Then sequencing the curriculum was talked about. So if vocabulary and structures are introduced gradually and practiced and are limited in number, and this links well with me saying less is more, it's better to teach less things but do it really well. And then a negative aspect was where there was no particular order and therefore children don't build on what they've learned before. In terms of remembering the curriculum, it was noted that in some cases children weren't remembering the vocabulary and grammar they'd been taught previously. And a positive aspect was a steady, consistent, step-by-step approach. Again, another negative thing around remembering, this was quite a damning report on looking at year 6, that they could only recall some basic vocab. Understanding of the sound spelling link, so that's phonics, is limited. And they cannot alter simple sentences to express their own views. So you'd hope that children could manipulate and change, say, sentences giving opinions to make it, what I would say, true for them, correct for them. So they're not, in this case, the curriculum wasn't, the impact of it was not effective. There are hundreds of reports of schools that have been inspected under the new framework. This is just an example of one that I found from last December, but this is repeated many times, and it says that unfortunately the curriculum in modern languages in primary schools is not as carefully planned and taught as other subjects. And this is often because primary teachers perhaps lack the expertise, lack the confidence in being able to do it. I think it's much better now. I think the younger primary teachers coming through are covering that in their learning when they're training how to be a teacher. But I know for many people, it will be an area where you perhaps feel you don't have as much confidence. So going back to these 3 pillars now, I want to focus firstly on phonics, and I want us to look at the Key Stage 2 programme of study and look at what would be an example of really good practice that's effective that inspectors would be looking for. And we know it's quite a broad sentence. It doesn't go into any more detail than this, but about teaching children to explore the patterns and sounds and make the sound spelling link. A progression model for French. This is I have done a lot of work around phonics in both French and Spanish. I taught in a primary school for many years and looked into how English phonics is taught and looked at how we can use those same techniques in teaching it in French. The good news is that French has less phonemes. So French has 36 phonemes compared to 44 in English. I would also argue that you don't need to focus on the phonemes that are exactly the same as those in English. So phonemes like p, m, n, s are identical. So children aren't going to be confused. They will just use their English rules of pronunciation that they've learnt. And there's around 22 out of the 36 phonemes in French that are very different. We don't need to focus on every single one of them, but the key ones are here. There's obviously a lot around vowels. And there's also the silent letter issue in French, silent letters at the ends of words, which is a rule that does need to be taught. And I would suggest the sooner the better. Children do need a small bank of words before you start teaching phonics because they need to have something to hang their learning on. So you wouldn't teach it on day 1, but you would teach it after about 6 or 7 weeks. And these are suggested phonemes to focus on because these are ones that children often struggle with. And you've got things in French like the nasal sounds, which are your UN, your IN, EN, AN, and then the R sound to make you sound a little bit more French. And if you can focus on those in particular, you're going to go a long way towards children sounding French and their pronunciation being accurate. And the good thing about French is that it's quite rule focused, unlike English, which is only 40% phonetic. English has sort of taken a mixture of the world languages, you know, from when we were conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, we took a lot of German on. From when we were conquered by William the Conqueror, we took a lot of French on. So ours is a bit of a mishmash, which is why so many children struggle with learning English and so many are dyslexic. French is very, very strict in terms of its rules. Spanish, additionally, is a very phonetic language. It's 99% phonetic. There are less phonemes that are different. There's around 16 that you need to focus on. And again, once you've learnt them, you can apply them to every single word you come across. So rather than having to learn separately the pronunciation of each new word, you just learn the rules of the phonemes and then you pronounce them. And if anyone teaches German, again, German is very, very phonetic. So the rules, again, are easy. Once you've learnt them, you apply them. So it is good to start young and start early. And then you keep reviewing and revisiting in years 5 and 6 as well. How could you teach phonemes? There's something called the Borel Maisony gesture method, which was developed in France actually to teach dyslexic children. And it's quite similar to our Jolly Phonics style methodology, where children learn sounds and they link to action. So this is me showing ants going down my arm is the sound for in English, and it links with the word ant. And the word sir is like a snake. So children are used to that. They learn these sounds and actions in reception in year 1, and we can build on that in year 2, in year 3 and 4, because it's not long since they've remembered this methodology. So I would recommend something like this. And in a scheme of work that I co-developed with Juliet Park, we asked a French teacher, she's called Marie-France here. You've got lots of examples of Marie-France doing lots of actions very helpfully with the particular key phonemes. And this is the gesture method. And I particularly recommend this for the younger learners. So if you do teach Key Stage 1, I would really highly recommend it. And I highly recommend it for year 3 as a starting point for a focus on phonemes. And there's things like you've got E, the letter E, which sounds like letter I sounds like an E in French. So that's the action. And then you touch the nose and it becomes A. So you're showing that it's a nasal sound. You've got the letter A, and then you touch the nose like this, and it becomes the nasal sound. So it's quite sort of intuitive in terms of the actions. You touch the neck R for the R sound, which is different and a bit more difficult for us. I'll just show you one example of this.
On le dit dans le nez. Loin du nez, c'est U. Près du nez, c'est un. Un. Lundi.
Okay. Then I would suggest another more systematic approach that once the children have learnt some gestures that link with particular sounds, this one takes it a bit further, and it takes it into the listening, reading, writing and speaking skills, which is more challenging, but again, children would need to be able to know how to do this. And this is something that I developed where it links each sound with an imaginary planet. So children will go and visit, for example, La Planète Oie.
La planète Oie.
And all the
Can you think of any words with the wa sound in?
And just like the methodology that teachers use when teaching English phonics, I tend to ask them to shut their eyes and think about any words they can think. And if you just think about numbers 1 to 20 or even 1 to 10, days of the week, animals, greetings, colours, all the sorts of things that children would learn in the first few weeks and months of language learning, you can easily think of lots of these.
3. Croissant.
Noir.
Poisson. Oiseau.
And you've got things like bonsoir as well. So lots of words that children would know. And this groups words according to sound, which is again the methodology used when teaching English phonics. So it's not going to be unusual for children. We then do a listening activity where they hear 2 words and they have to decide which of the 2 has the wa sound in. So this is them training their ear. And it makes them really good at listening to longer words and sentences now, because they're just focusing on an individual phoneme, but they will then know that that word will be spelled with OI, and it will help them to recognise more challenging words and phonemes.
La Côte d'Ivoire, le Cameroun, la Côte d'Ivoire, le Cameroun.
And it doesn't matter if children don't know these words. At the moment, we're just trying to focus on listening for sound. And we do that a few times. I'm just moving through quickly. We then look at a tongue twister, which has got lots of examples of that focus phoneme in, and children would have a go at practicing it. So
Il était une fois
won't play the whole thing,
un homme de
but you
foi
get the idea.
qui vendait du
And
foie.
it's quite a long one. So I would ask children, the more able children to learn the whole thing, have a go at saying it and practicing it, and maybe less able children to just do one sentence, and they sometimes practice it and then would present it to the class. And then finally, I'd ask them to pronounce some words that they hadn't come across before. And I just want them to be trained in how to pronounce new words without me having to tell them, every single time. And I would bring in other sounds so that we've got the on sound in here that they would have learned previously. So bit by bit, we are developing and enabling them to apply their knowledge of phonemes, because you're going to have a few different phonemes within each sound. So we hear that, they have a go pronouncing it, and then they hear the correct pronunciation afterwards. Moving swiftly on now to grammar. This is what the Key Stage 2 programme of study says. It doesn't say that much, so it talks about gender, it talks about high frequency verbs, it talks about features and patterns. So really it's up to us to design a curriculum that would meet that. I would suggest that this is a sort of sequence that you could look at. So gender is so important in French, you've got to cover it in year 3 really. I would mainly focus on the je form, the I form of some key high frequency words like je suis, I am, j'ai, I have, je voudrais. Then move on to the negative, look at adjectival agreements. By the way, it would be an adjective word order in year 3. Things like possessive adjectives, and then moving on to a wider range of he, she, we, and so on. And then the simple future tense, I'm going to play football, and the past tense in year 6. And if any of you teach Spanish, very similar. I've got very similar example here for you. So how could we do this? Well, stories are a really good way to present grammar in context. And this is an example of a story about a rabbit going to the supermarket to buy a cake. We're using the va, he is going or it is going, je vais, où vas-tu. You can see the words highlighted in red, and we can see all the different parts of the verb aller, to go, but the third most high frequency verb in French, and the absolute key verb to use the simple future tense. So it's really important. And you can teach it with these verbs in context, and just to enjoy the story to begin with. Then I ask the children to focus on the words in red, which are the verbs, and then we have a look at the conjugation, and which I've just put up there on the right-hand side as well. We need to look at patterns in the language. So what do all these Spanish verbs have in common? These are the AR verbs, the most frequent group of verbs in Spanish, with lots of little people jumping around and being a bit distracting, but that helps us understand what they mean as well. And so we look at patterns here. We look at these are all AR verbs. Where appropriate, and especially with high frequency verbs like the verb to be, it's good to have little pictures that can help us remember who it is that's doing that action. So these pictures help support it. And I'm going to play a little rap that helps us to almost like learn and practice and memorize this verb conjugation.
Je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont.
And that rap comes from the Language Factory, whose songs I really recommend, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of using songs to help build memory. And then moving on now to vocabulary, as suggested, again, there's no right or wrong, but there are some obvious things that you would want to choose. I wouldn't teach numbers all at once, so I'd do them bit by bit over year 3, but eventually we'd get up to 1 to 15. You'd obviously start with things like greetings, classroom instructions, Animals are a really nice one to start with, so are colours. And then we do need to have something around traditions and cultural capital in the target language countries. Then you can see in year 4, we move on to things like parts of the body, food, opinions are always a good one. I do like some French maths. I like children to be able to give dates and understand dates, personal descriptions describing family, clothes. So it's all about things that our children will want to talk about, that are about their real life. Moving on to year 5, we've got sports, hobbies, a developing range of opinions, things like weather, higher numbers, school subjects, description of schools, transport and so on. It's really important to make sure we don't just talk about France or Spain, but a wider range of countries, such as countries in West Africa like Senegal that speak French. And then finally into year 6, using the numbers to tell the time, describing our daily routine, looking at daily routine of children in other countries, looking at describing houses, rooms, furniture, places in the town, and so on. So you can see here, this is a secondary teacher would say that this would sort of probably pretty much cover the traditional year 7 curriculum. And obviously they usually have 3 or 4 lessons a week and they've got more teaching time. So you'd want to be covering that at least by the end of year 6. I want to move on now to talk about learning and memorising vocab, because this was brought up in the Ofsted inspection reports, and it's particularly important that we think about that, and that children are put in a situation where they often have to retrieve language from memory. Now, this is called the testing effect, and it's been later called retrieval practice. You've probably come across it in other contexts. If you go into YouTube and put John Dunlosky, he has got a brilliant talk where he talks about retrieval practice, and he's actually not a linguist at all, but he uses learning Swahili as an example. And he's got lots of research that shows that when children and students are tested and have to test themselves and practice and pull that language out of their memory, the act of doing that actually makes them learn it. So it's not just a testing thing, it's actually doing it to help you remember it. I hope that makes sense. Now, when I'm teaching year 11 students to try and get them through their GCSEs, I do just give them lots of traditional tests, and I say, go away and learn this for homework and you're going to be tested on it next week. I don't really want to demotivate primary children, but there's lots of ways where we can still test them, in the sense that we're getting them to retrieve and pull that knowledge out of their memory, but they think they're doing a game and they think it's fun. So I think that bit is particularly important, to make it a fun activity for them, but you're still doing some testing with them. So, and then just finally, why is it so important, and how often do we need to revisit vocab? Usually about 20 times when you're learning a foreign language, because often the word is so different, is so weird, there's often nothing that you can hang your learning from. So I'll just give an example of the beach is la plage in French. Well, I could never guess that. There are lots of cognates, but la plage is not a cognate. And so before it's going to stick in my head, I will have had to access it, come across it about 20 times. And that's why repetitive practice and games and using language learning apps are so important, because they will mean that the children are accessing it and coming across these words so many more times. Okay. So what could it look like in a primary classroom? I'm going to show you and talk you through a few different games in particular, and these work really well for any age. So this is a vocabulary game, a shopping basket game, which is really good for food. And it's a bit like the game of my mum went to market and she bought, and you can go around and they have to add another, obviously do it in the target language, and they have to add another item, but remember what was said before. You can give them a shopping list and they've got to take a series of cards and say what the item is before they put it on the table. So they take the card that's the baguette and say la baguette. They take the banana and say le banane. And then they also have to try and fill their shopping basket with the items that they have on their list. You've got a slap the board game, which is where children are split into 2 teams. You number them 1 to 15, obviously in the target language again. And you'll say le numéro 3, and both number 3s have to run to the board. And then I say an item like il neige, and they have to slap the board. And the first person to slap the board gets a point for their team. And you can develop this and have more and more words. You don't have to just have words for one topic. You can have words or pictures that link to lots of different topics to go back and review learning from previous topics. And they do say that people tend to forget around week 3 or 4. So if you can then review and bring back vocab that they learned, say 3 or 4 weeks ago, then you're going to make sure it's not going to go out of their long-term memory, but it will still keep being reviewed. You've got things like board games. So they throw a dice, and once they land on a particular item, they've got to be able to describe it and say what it is. So again, they're pulling that out of their memory. You've got things like quiz trade, which we've got here on the right hand side. This has been color coded because it gets more difficult over time. So I try and print it out in color, and I'd give especially if you have mixed age classes, this is good. I'll give the younger or the less able children the easier ones first. And as they get good at them, they can then have a go at the next colour up. And you obviously give the brighter, more able or older children the harder ones in green. That's a Kagan activity. Another Kagan activity is round robin. And this is a great one for practicing vocab, and children would go round and one person would say, if maybe they're trying to revise foods, he says les pommes, and the person next to him has to say apples. And then she gives another French word to the next person. So she might say le pain, and the next person has to say bread. So you're going round, and you could even have the list of the words up, so they make sure that they go around in order and they have to say what the word is. And it's a good idea to do it both into English and then from English into the target language that you're teaching, because they need to know it both ways. So it's a game, but really it's just testing vocab as well. Song is particularly important to help learn and teach languages, because if the tune is quite catchy, children will remember the song and they will sort of sing along to it even when they're not doing French. So they're actually learning while they're running around playing and doing other activities. So here's a couple of really catchy songs that I particularly like, which are from the Language Factory, and actually which have been included in the scheme of work that I've co-written with Juliet Park. Okay, pause that one and
Bonjour fille, bonjour garçon. Bonne nuit fille, bonne nuit garçon. Comment t'appelles-tu? Je m'appelle Jean-Luc. Salut fille, salut garçon.
Now, I've used these songs a lot in my teaching, and I can absolutely assure you, sometimes it's quite annoying, but you just cannot get these songs out of your head. And I really like the fact that they've been recorded as well, with children singing as well. So yeah, these are the Language Factory songs, which you can buy separately. I think you can also get them on iTunes. And as I said, they do form part of the scheme of work which I co-authored. Language learning apps and websites. If any of you try to learn a language yourself, you might have learned use something like Duolingo. I was using it a couple of years ago for Italian, and that's great because it's quite repetitive and it makes me go over and over again, so it helps the words to stick. There is an app that I've co-developed called the Language Builder app. It's on the App Store. I think it's $2.99, and this covers phonics, vocab and grammar, as well as a sentence builder. And something like that, again, because children are enjoying using it, they could play it on a phone or an iPad. It can be Android as well. Then it's just all going to be for the good, in the sense that they are accessing the language over and over again. I think it's particularly nice when instant feedback is provided and children can build up points and things like that. And that's obviously one of the things that people who do gaming and create these games know, that if you get something back from doing well on it, then you're more likely to have another go, and it will save your points and how well you've scored. Just moving on to remembering the curriculum. This is what Ofsted says, that over the course of study, we need to focus on how, that should be say long-term, not log-term content has been taught, This is a statue in the Rodin Museum. I was hoping to go to Paris with my daughter last summer, but it never happened. But fortunately, it turns out that my Rodin ticket for the museum lasts 100 years. So hopefully sometime in the next 100 years, I'm going to get a chance to take my daughter to see one of my favourite museums in Paris, the Thinker and Rodin. But how can we actually think about making sure that this long-term content goes in and is integrated into children's knowledge banks? It's often here that we do fail as language teachers. So it's this idea of recycling, checking, quizzing over and over again. And this particularly came out from Michael Wardle, the Chief Inspector. Again, he would say that we don't spend enough time doing this. And when he goes into primary languages lessons and sees it, too often children aren't remembering what they've been taught. And again, I would urge you to say, less is more. So just keep it simple, reduce the amount of vocabulary in particular, because you do have to teach the phonemes, the key phonemes. You have to teach some key grammar structures, but then don't go overboard with the actual vocab content. Keep it simple, make sure that children, because they can do quite a lot. They can create sentences with quite a lot of sentences without too much vocab. So other ways that we could help retrieval practice is using things like knowledge organisers, or sometimes people call them knowledge navigators. I would highly recommend these and encourage children to test themselves on them, but it is really important that they've got the correct pronunciation as well, so that once you've taught the phonemes, that at least they're testing themselves accurately on them. And then the drip feeding of learning throughout the week is seen as being particularly important. And in the scheme of work that I've developed, we have a section called Throughout the Week and Out of Lesson Learning, and also online smartboard activities, because this is particularly important too. I've got lots of questions in here. Just going to check that. Okay, so people are asking me about, is there a list of high frequency words and verbs in French? Really, it's the key verbs are to have, to be, and to go. The name of the scheme that has the different planets for different sounds is the iLanguages scheme of work, which I'm going to tell you about at the end. Is there a good programme to teach French in Key Stage 2 that has the equivalent of English letters and sounds? Yes, there is, and I'm going to tell you about how to access that at the end. In addition, it has the story, but I am going to give you a chance to, if you send me your email, I'm going to send you everything in a sort of zip file, so not just my PowerPoint, but the actual activities, such as the stories that I've talked about. People have asked if you can see the grammar sequence slide again. This whole PowerPoint will be accessible to you, so feel free to either watch the webinar again or actually have a look at the PowerPoint when I get that sent to you. The rap songs are from the Language Factory. Is there an expectation to have the main verbs conjugated by the end of year 6? It does say in the primary, in the programme of study, that children should be able to conjugate high frequency verbs. That is one of, it doesn't say very much, but that's one of the key things that it does say. Yes, you can have a copy of my PowerPoint. The Language Builder app, yes, is available on Android. So if you just search that term, yes, you'll be able to get it. Do I have any suggestions for teachers who only have 30 to 45 minutes advice? Yes. And can I explain the Quiz Quiz Trade game? Yes, I'm sorry that I didn't explain that properly. So the way Quiz Quiz Trade works is that a child will have a slip of paper and they have a sentence on it in French with its English translation, or you can just give them the French sentence and they have to translate it themselves. They will go around and find a partner. It's a nice moving activity, so it's quite active. They will say to another child, j'aime les chats, really simple one, j'aime les chats, and the child has to try and translate it back to them. They could give them a clue. So that means I like cats. They might say I like, to give them a little bit of a clue, or they could say it's an opinion or it's about an animal. And then they can give them up to 2 clues. And then once the child has translated it, then they ask them to translate their sentence. So they each have to do it. So that's the quiz. One quiz is one quiz is the other. And then trade is when they swap their little pieces of paper around and they go off and find somebody else to do the same thing with. And obviously because of that, it's important that every little bit of paper is different, so that they're getting exposure to new language and having to translate new language each time they do it. Yeah, the activities and stories also for teaching Spanish as well, which I'll tell you about, and any suggestions where we can get some more support from Phonics. Again, I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. So I didn't want to sort of ignore all those questions coming through. And I will just move, I've got how many more minutes? 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to move through the end of my presentation. The scope of the curriculum, as we all know from Ofsted, needs to make sure that we are also supporting pupils with SEND, disadvantaged pupils. Cultural capital is really important, and the scheme that I've co-written does include a lot of examples of cultural capital. This one, for example, I can't show you that I don't have time, is a video clip. And there's lots of video clips in both the French and Spanish versions of children in their sort of normal, in their home and in their school and at the market. So you can see what real life is like in those countries, and children can learn more about that. A progression matrix for assessment is really important, and this is something that I've co-developed with some language learning specialists in various local authorities. And so the age-related expectations around, say, listening here, around speaking, around writing, either independently or with support, and around grammar are really important. So again, you can see that progression, you can see how it gets more difficult, and we can see that that's the fantastic progress. And they I'm sure that so I show that if you were and also the language, and she will and please read all about teachers. Just understandable. I just watched